So we want to introduce you to our first assignment, which is the Gap Analysis Initiative. And so the approach that we're taking to this is to really ask you three questions and have you think about this. So when we think about vacuum technology education in the U.S., we want to make a list of what's missing. And we'll talk a little bit about some categories of that to give you some guidelines. Then we want to ask, well, why is that element important? Some things might be missing and might not be as important as others. Why is it important? What's the rationale for putting it on the list? And then third, what would be different if that gap was addressed and we could replace what is missing? And that's important because that's going to drive us towards how do we measure whether we've done anything about it as we implement some of these new plans. So those three questions and the answers to those three questions are meant to drive the growth and sustainability of these programs, not just at Normandale, but across the U.S. And to get us to that point. So what we're going to do is when this workshop is over, we're going to provide you with a worksheet that looks like this. We're going to ask you to identify the sector that you represent, and we're just looking at the broad sectors of coatings, advanced manufacturing, R&D labs, education and training, and of course we'll give you an opportunity for the other. But we're just looking for a broad sector response from you along those lines. We are going to ask you to briefly describe your organization, what you provide in terms of products and services, and then briefly describe the role that vacuum technology plays in your sector. We understand that most people aren't just uniquely vacuum, they're using vacuum technology to do something else, and we'd like to understand what role that technology plays. And then the key thing then is to answer these three questions. What's missing? Identifying the gap or opportunity. And we're looking at categories that you can use to drive your thinking. What's missing in existing knowledge? That could be curriculum content. There could be technical topics that aren't covered in the programs that you're aware of. Could be a set of skills that are important to your workers. Another category could be infrastructure, labs, equipment. And that infrastructure could also be organizational networks, connecting with other colleagues or peers or people that you can call on to help solve problems. It could be specific activities and programs. So for example, apprenticeship programs or work-based learning programs or OJT programs that are missing. Telepresence is another example of an activity that could be missing. Maybe there are some sector-specific gaps, something that's unique for the manufacturing industry or something that's unique to the R&D sector that has some challenges for you. And then just finally, any big opportunities. Maybe there's an unmet market that if certain things could be done, it would allow you to expand or to make real inroads into some areas that you're not in now. So that's not an exclusive list, but those are just some ideas to drive your thinking on this. As you identify those, we're going to ask you to provide at least some kind of brief reason why you think it's important, what it is that's missing there, and then the expected result. And the idea behind that is to help us develop metrics. We're not asking you to come up with a specific measurable, but something that would be noticeably different in the world as a result of providing that gap. And then we can, as we develop a plan, we can talk about whether or not there's a way to capture that information. So to give you an example, we've filled out a brief worksheet from the perspective of Normandale Community College. So to give you an idea of what we're looking for, the sector that they represent is the education and training sector. We've got that checked off. The organization, they talked about the degrees and certificate programs that they provide in vacuum technology and the role that vacuum technology plays in their sector. And then to look at an example of gaps, one gap that is identified by community colleges is the fact that community college are often second or third options for post-high school, that they are often perceived either as transfer schools or maybe not playing the role that they need to. The reason that's important is because community colleges are underutilized, particularly when it comes to meeting workforce needs. And if that gap was addressed, if the perception of community college was changed, we would expect to see increased enrollments, we would expect to see more completers, and we would expect to see more community college students going into the workforce placed into jobs. A second example, community colleges are still learning how to embrace and deploy distributed learning technology. So that's an example of an infrastructure type of gap. The reason that's important is because this video conferencing and telepresence is an emerging platform. We're seeing more and more and more of it, and that use is even expanded greatly now that we're dealing with this pandemic and we're trying to figure out how to continue these programs. Same thing there. If we address that gap and become better at deploying these technologies, we would expect to see increased enrollments in these telepresence classes. So those are just a couple of real quick examples of gaps, rationale for those, and the type of outcomes that we would see.